The day my son was born, the man who told me he wanted to be a father someday was putting on a tuxedo across town and promising someone else forever. That sentence still tastes like metal on my tongue. If you need a neat beginning, there it is, a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and orange juice, a newborn crying small and even cries on my chest, and a phone buzzing with a picture of a cake topped with 2 gold initials that weren't mine. I could say I didn't know then. But the truth is more embarrassing. A part of me always knew something was off and kept smoothing it down like a wrinkled bedsheet I was sure I could flatten if I pressed hard enough. Before anyone decides where to stand on me, sympathy, disgust, eye roll, let me give you the version I lived. I'm 29, old enough to know better, apparently still young enough to gamble on promises. I met him on a Sunday, the kind of hot that makes the whole city look like it's sweating through its shit. He had one of those faces that seems to carry light around with it, like a portable halo you don't have to believe in. He had the story too, building something, almost there, bigger plans than his apartment could hold. I liked the bigness. I liked how he was decisive about tiny things, this salad dressing, not that one, this shortcut, not that route, and vague as a wish about everything else. It made me feel as if I were stepping onto a moving walkway. You just plant your feet and let momentum flatter you. When I found out I was pregnant, it was a Tuesday at 6:12 a.m. The clock on the stove had burned out one segment, so every time it was a 9 it looked like an 8 missing a piece. I took the test because my period was late, because my breast hurt in the animal way, because coffee suddenly smelled like a closet full of pennies. I was ready for one line and got 2. The second was faint, like a timid hand up in class, but it was there. I stood there breathing too carefully, like deep lungfuls could blow the line away. Then I cried yes, the cliché cry, bent over the sink, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I told him that night. No dialogue here, you don't need the exact words to understand the shape of what he said. The shape was avoidance dressed up as strategy. A baby, he insisted, would wreck the ladder he was climbing. He saw timing as a math equation, and this was a negative sign slapped across his life plan. He said he wasn't ready in a tone that made it sound like a noble trait, like he was sparing me some future failure by buying out now. I decided to keep the baby. I want that recorded without apologizing. It was the first decision in a long time that felt like it came from my gut and not from the tiny focus group I keep in my head where a panel of imagined people debate what I should do and whether I'll look foolish doing it. My body had already started to feel like a home. That's the only way I can put it. I won't pretend it didn't cross my mind that my career was barely stabilized, my savings were the financial equivalent of a flimsy umbrella, and I've been raised on a steady diet of warnings about girls who mess up their futures. But the decision settled, like snow in a globe that keeps swirling and then suddenly stops. The flakes are still there, they've just decided where to land. I moved out of his place. It wasn't a dramatic exit. You imagine slamming doors because movies told you to. My version was cardboard boxes that smelled like detergent, the toaster wrapped in a dish towel, a sweatshirt I stole and kept because it held the curve of his shoulders like a ghost. He said he'd help. He didn't. I promised myself not to take inventory of that because I already knew what column it would fall under. Pregnancy is lonely anyway. People make noises about flowing and connection, but for months it's you and your stomach in a staring contest, you and a food diversion you didn't order, you and a doctor who measures your blood and turns the numbers into fate. I learned to love saltines, learned to nap like napping were a sport, learned which nurse in my clinic squeezed my arm as if she could press reassurance through skin. I learned to hold both things at once, fear and excitement, pretending and grief. Around the end of the first trimester, I told my parents. My mother's face did the complicated thing faces do when they're trying to hold 2 opposite emotions and not spill either. She has this habit of straightening things on the table when she's trying to say something kind and practical at the same time. Through all of it, she kept moving a set of coasters into a perfect square, like if they clicked into place, my life would too. My father asked me if I was happy. He didn't mean it as a test. I said yes, and this is important, I meant it, even while I was terrified. He told me that most of life is learning how to carry 2 heavy bags without hating the weight. Sometimes his wisdom shows up wearing a sweater vest and a dad joke, but it sticks. I worked. I budgeted like I was on a game show. I found a tiny 1-bedroom in a building that smelled like boiled onions and history. The floor was complaint when you walked, but the light in the afternoon was honest. I bought a second-hand curb and sanded it until my fingers were soft and raw, then painted it a color I googled as milk with a little cloud. I started calling the baby Peanut because he looked like one on the first opusand, a smudge with a heartbeat so authoritative it made me cry in a new way this time because something was insisting on existing and it didn't care that my spreadsheet had too many red numbers. Then, months later, he came back. Yes, I know how that reads. He showed up like a storm that had decided to turn around and give us one more damper. He had the ring. He had the timing after the belly had rendered into undeniable. He had words about growth and change and fear and how it had left him. He made a case for himself like a good lawyer. He brought small gifts, practical ones, like he'd learned that practicality looks like love in prenatal season, almond butter, prenatal gummies, a pair of shoes that were mostly a hug for swollen feet. He asked to come to the next appointment. Before you file me under gullible, remember that forgiveness feels like stepping into warm water when you've been cold for months. He held my hand at the ultrasound and flinched when he heard the heartbeat. He cried a little quietly, like he was embarrassed his mascara might run even though he didn't wear any. He told his friends loud. He started to talk about baby names, about nursery paint colors, as if picking paint could paint over everything. He set up a photo of the ultrasound on his desk. He rubbed my back when my lower spine felt like it had been swapped out for rusty gears. He studied stroller reviews with the same fervor he'd used to compare stock pics. He posted a picture of my bump with a vague caption about blessings. Our friends said we looked happier. I did. Oh, I looked like I believed we could be. There were hairline cracks even then. He had texts he wouldn't open in front of me, pockets of time that sounded like missing puzzle pieces, weekend errands that took too long. He'd take calls in the hallway and come back with his face arranged. He had explanations, the kind you can't fact-check, a supplier on the East Coast, a friend in crisis, a delayed shipment, a dog that needed to be walked for an elderly neighbor. I've always been polite to explanations. I grew up believing that if someone gives you a reason with enough syllables, you respect it. My gut, the same one carrying a whole person, knocked quietly. I said I didn't hear it. He went to my 3rd trimester checkups. He pressed his ear to my stomach and talked about being the kind of dad who shows up. He liked to plan out loud in a way that created rooms for me to live in. He would do middle of the night diaper duty. He would be there for the first bath. He would be the kind of man his father wasn't. He would be better. He brought over a set of tiny socks that looked like something he'd put on a squirrel. He told everyone at his gym he was about to be a dad, and they slapped his back, one of those back slaps men do that seems to carry a message about joining a secret club. I wanted so badly for this to be the moment in the movie where the background music swells and you forgive the man because he finally woke up. I wanted that scene. I wanted that soundtrack. I am not embarrassed to admit that. But my life doesn't consult a director. Labor started on a Wednesday night, the kind of cramps that make you go silent mid-sentence and stare at an invisible point on the wall. It was slow at first, like someone reminding you gently, then it turned into a metronome you can't turn off. I texted him. He sent back a confetti emoji and said he was on his way. I breathed the way the childbirth class videos told me to, pretended the bathtub was magic, tried to remember that every pain had an end built into it. He didn't come. Not immediately, not in a way I could hold in my hand. I called once, then again, then thought about not being that woman and called again anyway. Straight to voicemail. My neighbor drove me to the hospital because I didn't want to pay for an ambulance and because she'd been waiting for a reason to feel useful all week. The nurse asked me, in that bright way nurses do to keep a room from deflating, whether I wanted to put anyone else on their approved visitors list. I said his name. My voice did a strange thing, as if it wanted to be brave and reasonable at the same time and instead came out as a cough. The delivery was exactly the kind of messy strength people don't post about. There was blood and swearing I'll pretend I didn't during a point when I thought my bones would split into letters and rearrange themselves into a new word. And there was also the kind of focus that makes time behave. When the baby finally arrived, a tiny, wailing, furious at the light, I felt this fierce, animal softness take over my whole body, like someone had turned my skin inside out in fine velvet. He wasn't there. I kept looking at the doorway as if the doorway owed me a miracle. The nurse tightened her mouth in that way professionals do when they refuse to judge you but can't keep their faces from joining in. My phone buzzed with congratulations from friends who had been expecting this text for days. Then it buzzed with the notification from the app that thinks you care about people's life events even if you muted them. A friend of a friend post. I recognized the venue in the background. It's where people with Pinterest boards full of peonies and calligraphy go to make a point. He was in a suit I'd never seen. He had his arm around a woman I'd heard about, the kind of heard about that sits like a rumour under your ribcage. A colleague he respected, someone in the industry, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't scroll through the photos like they were a crime scene. The caption talked about finally finding your person, about families blending, about gratitude. I stared at the date. It was that day. The next part is a montage I wish I could spare you. My mouth went dry in a way no ice water can fix. I looked at my son and then back at the screen, like I needed a witness. My neighbour asked if I was okay and I laughed, this sharp-wrong laugh that bounced off the linoleum. The nurse took my phone out of my hand like it was a weapon and put it face down, then tucked a blanket around my baby as if the problem were temperature. People moved around me. Someone adjusted my room in 4. Someone else shouted something. Life continued as it does, which felt offensive. He texted later that night. A single line about being sorry, about confusion, about everything being complicated. It was the kind of text you sent when you've counted the potential sentences and picked the one least likely to get you sued. My body was still shaking with the aftershocks of labor, and I held my son while reading words that shrank the entire room. I didn't answer. People think silence is weak. It isn't. It is muscle and breath and discipline. It is not giving what you are asked for. I learned the rest in pieces. A friend sent me a screenshot of a registry. Another friend, who knows someone who knows everyone, told me she'd heard the other woman was pregnant too. Due in 3 months. Which means math I don't need to spell out for you. He had been conducting a parallel life like an amateur orchestra, except the instruments were women and the sheet music was lies. He had picked which plan looked better on paper and walked into it wearing a rented tux. I went home from the hospital with my son and a new understanding of how far reality can stretch before it snaps. Postpartum is already a hall of mirrors. Your body is a stranger, your mind is a cat you can't coax out from under the bed, your nights are chopped into 5-minute slices. Add betrayal to that and you get a unique brand of midnight. I made bottles while crying. I cried while changing diapers and laughed in a cracked way while watching my son sleep with his mouth open like a tiny drunk. I googled milk supply like it were a stock ticker I could influence with enough research. He tried to call. There were messages I didn't open because I didn't want them living inside my phone like mold. He sent flowers that died quietly the way cut things do. He wrote an email that used the word mistake in a way that made it sound like a drop glass. He offered money, which deserves its own paragraph. Money is where people get loud about what you should do. Take it for the baby, they say. Don't let pride starve you. Don't be stupid. Or refuse it, you're not for sale. Stand up straight. Show him you can do this without him. Here is the ugly middle where I live. I took the money I needed for hospital bills and early supplies and drew a line like a bouncer. I documented everything. I got a lawyer, the kind with a voice like a stairwell. I put his name on the birth certificate because I value accuracy even when it hurts me. I set terms through the court because some things are better handled by institutions than by your shaking voice at 2 in the morning. Yes, I contacted the other woman. I did it once, not to beg or to scream, but to say, here's my reality and the date and the math. She didn't reply. She didn't owe me one. People make their own bargains with what they can stand. I pictured her scrolling through our messages with her stomach tight and smooth, telling herself a story in which she had won because there was a dress in an aisle and family members whose happiness looked like a verdict. Maybe that story holds. Maybe it's already tearing at the seams. That's not on me. In the weeks after, the city narrowed to the radius of the stroller and the coffee shop that handed me cups with an extra shot of kindness. I learned the exact time of day the light in my apartment turned into something gentle enough to forgive everything. I watched my son learn how to focus his eyes and how to grip my finger like a promise. I watched myself learn how to get by with less than my mother had insisted on, to redefine luxury as a shower and help as a text that says I'm downstairs, hand me the baby. Should I have seen this coming? People asked that without asking it. They searched my face for the part of me that wanted the lie more than I wanted the truth. I don't fully absolve myself. There were signs. There are always signs. But forgive me for believing people who say they love me. Forgive me for wanting my son to hear his father's heartbeat in the same room as mine and not through a phone. Forgive me for thinking a ring might be a door and not a trap. The part of this story that gets less attention because it isn't as shiny is the dirty work. The way a baby's head smells like warmth invented a new word. The way tiny socks disappear into the dryer as if there's a vortex dedicated to making you feel like you're losing it. The way I can now do 6 things with one hand: sterilize a bottle, send an email, eat a piece of toast that's more air than toast, cry a little, laugh and meanwhile regret later, and still find space to look down at this person who knows my heartbeat better than anyone. Every so often, he appears. Not physically. I block that. But life has ways of delivering people to your doorstep anyway. I'll be walking, pushing the stroller, and a car similar to his will turn the corner and my body will do that ancient animal thing: freeze, consider flight. Or a notification will pop up because some algorithm thinks I care about a man's workout video, and I'll have to sit down because a photo of him in a new set of clothes looks like the part of a play where the character changes costumes and becomes a better person. You should know, people get very good at looking improved without changing their shape. There's a version of this story where I forgive him publicly and we co-parent with matching calendars and everyone claps at holidays. Maybe someday there's a version where I don't think about him at all, where he is someone else's problem and my son has a stepfather who ties his shoes and teaches him to throw a ball or not because maybe he cares about books and bugs instead. There's a version where my son grows up asking hard, specific questions and I answer them with hard, specific truths. I prefer that one. The day I went to the courthouse to file the paperwork that turns chaos into a set of clear rails, I passed a wedding party on the steps. They looked like an ad for second chances. The bride's veil caught on something and a stranger helped her free it and everyone laughed. I wanted to tell her, don't forget to check the math. But I'm not the ghost who whispers warnings through lace. Inside, the clerk behind the plexiglass asked me whether I wanted to pursue child support. She said it like an option on her menu. I checked a box. The paperwork turned a man into case numbers and percentages. I walked out into sunlight that felt like it had been assigned just to me for 30 seconds. Let me say something that will make some of you mad. I don't hate him. Hating him would mean carrying him around in a special part of my body meant for precious things. He doesn't get that real estate. He gets boundaries and legal agreements in silence. He gets the chance to do the bare minimum and often fails to do it, and that is now on record. I do not wake up thinking about revenge. I wake up because a hungry person who looks like me if you squint needs me to. Another thing that will make some of you mad, I am glad he came back before everything went off the rails. Not because it redeemed him, but because those weeks gave me something I don't think I can explain to people who haven't needed it. I got to imagine a version of the future where my son's father learned to be worthy of the title. Pretend futures are scaffolding, you take them down when the building stands, but you needed them while it was just a frame. I still talk to him in my head sometimes. Not dialogues, not anymore. More like a narrator giving commentary you didn't ask for. I tell him about the way our son gurgles when he's sleepy, like a tiny murder starting up. I tell him about how he smiled for the first time and it wasn't gas, you could tell because the smile started in his eyes. I tell him about the first time I felt actually okay, like not just the version of okay you say to coworkers, but the kind where you put on a shirt that isn't stretchy and remember you used to have collarbones. The commentary isn't for him. It's for the part of me that still wants to share good things with the person who gave me this good thing, even if he also set fire to the house around it. My mother asked me recently if I plan to change my son's last name. Practical woman, always organizing the table while asking the big questions. I told her the truth, I don't know yet. Names are stories and I don't want to write his for him. Maybe I keep it and it becomes trivia. Maybe I change it and we build our own. Maybe he decides when he's old enough that he wants something different because he's allowed to. Choice is the only luxury I insist on now. Some nights, usually the ones where the apartment is too quiet and the ceiling fan sounds like a judge, I draft a letter in my head I would never send to the other woman. It says, I hope he is better with you. I hope he gives you the version he promised me and then withdrew like a refund with a hidden fee. I hope your child never learns time by the rhythm of a door that doesn't open. And also, if he isn't better, you are not weak for leaving or staying or taking a minute to figure out which way is up. I imagine she writes back with something that lands like a yes in my body. Then I picture her happy and I'm surprised to find I can hold that image and not choke on it. You want the moral. That's why you stayed this long. People like to tie other people's stories into bows because loose ends make them edgy. Here's what I have. People are capable of running 2 lives at once and believing both. Promises are cheap until they cost you something. Babies will fold your heart into shapes you didn't know paper could become. Your gut is quieter than fear, you have to lean in. Do I regret choosing my son? Not for a second that counts. Do I regret letting his father back in? I regret not making him earn it. I regret mistaking effort-adjacent gestures for effort. I regret the ways I silenced the part of me that knew a shadow when it saw one. But I am done using regret as a full-time job. One more confession before you decide whether to type a kind comment or an angry one. Sometimes, when my son falls asleep on my chest and the room goes soft around the edges, I feel a grief that doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the version of him that will one day ask where his father was when he came into the world and why that man chose a different room. I rehearse answers that are true and gentle and won't make him carry my bitterness the way I refused to carry it for his father. I will say that his father was not ready to be the man I needed him to be, and that readiness is not the same as love. I will say that he was wanted every second by me and by a circle of people who showed up. I will say that families can be made out of what remains after something breaks. Today my son is 8 weeks old. He smiles at ceiling fans like they are his heroes. We went to a park and I let the sun touch his cheeks for exactly 3 minutes because the internet has trained me to fear UV rays like they're villains. A stranger said he has my eyes and I felt the thread inside me pull taut and sweet. On the way home, a notification lit up my phone. It was him again, saying he wants to meet, that he is ready now to be involved. Ready now, 2 words that would have lit me up like a flare 6 months ago and now land like junk mail. I drafted a reply I didn't send. It said, involvement isn't a feeling, it's a calendar. It's paperwork and diapers at 3 a.m. and showing up when the showing up is boring. It's the unglamorous weightlifting of love. I deleted it. I called my lawyer instead. We set a time, a place, a set of rules an adult should be able to follow. If he shows, he shows. If he doesn't, I won't break bones that have already healed crooked and strong. Either way, my son will be held. So here's my ending, which you're welcome to judge. On the day my son was born, the man who had promised me the future was at an altar creating a different one. I can wrath it in anger, in pity, in 1,000 opinions about women like me and men like him. Or I can let the facts sit down and be facts and build a life on top of them anyway. Tonight, I will wash bottles and fold the tiny shirts that feel like they belong to a doll, and I will kiss a forehead that smells like everything new and good. I will not speak his father's name out loud. I will not turn myself into a martyr or a cautionary tale. I will become exactly what I needed the day the kickfruit arrived, someone who chooses the person who couldn't choose anyone yet. Maybe someday I'll run into him and the wife and the baby, the parallel life that almost swallowed mine. Maybe he'll look startled and I'll smile and keep walking because mercy sometimes looks like not stopping. Maybe my son will be holding my hand and he'll see a man whose face means nothing to him and I'll feel a pang that is grief and relief braided together. And if, later, my son asks who that was, I'll tell him a true story with an ending that isn't an apology. I'll say, that was a man who taught me that plans can break and you can still build something better with the pieces. And if you really need a final line to argue with, try this: some betrayals are a gift wrapped in fire. I walked through it. I am done being burned.